All right, hello again, and welcome to our Cash for College Advanced FAFSA webinar. We're happy to be with you this new year to support the class of 2025. So we want to ensure that they're able to access all kinds of financial aid to support their post-secondary pursuits. We're grateful to all of our sponsors who provide funding to make sure that these trainings are completely free for you. So thank you to everyone you see on the screen today. We're also very grateful for our partners in this work, the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, the Alabama Community College System, the Alabama State Department of Education, and then Get Educated, which is the Common Black College application. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please keep your microphones on mute at all times just to avoid any feedback during the presentation. This webinar will be recorded. We'll upload it to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Alabama Possible. We usually get that uploaded in a couple of days, so give us until Friday. Throughout today's webinar, you're able to submit questions using the Zoom chat feature. We'll be monitoring the chat. We'll have a dedicated time for Q&A towards the end of the webinar, but if it's relevant to answer during the webinar, we'll also do it as we see them. We've received a few questions during the registration process, so we'll make sure to address those questions as we move through our slides today. And then lastly, we're going to have poll questions for you to answer towards the end of our session. For educators who are wanting professional development credit, please be sure to stay all the way towards the end. This will be an hour-and-a-half webinar today, and we'll make sure that you get your PD credit. So we would love it if you would tag us on social media. You can find us at AL Goes to College. We'd love to know more about what you're doing, especially as it relates to financial aid events for your seniors. You can also use the hashtags #PelYes, #FAFSA, and #CashForCollege. So today we're really focused on the Cash for College initiative, the goal of which is to support every graduating senior with completing the free application for federal student aid. This is really the way to open up all kinds of opportunities for aid, so federal, state, and institutional aid to pay for education and training. Our main items today are the steps to complete the FAFSA and accept aid, and then some of the key updates for the 2025-26 FAFSA. So if you attended our webinar in November, this is basically a repeat of that. We know a lot of y'all were not able to be there because of the Counseling Association conference. So this will be a repeat, but we'll also provide several updates throughout with new information we've learned. Real quick, I want to launch a poll question so we can get practice with the polls, but also hear some feedback from you. So we'd like to know the most common challenge your families are experiencing this FAFSA cycle. And this is a free response style question, so I'm going to give you about a minute to answer. If you could describe it as briefly as possible, that would be much appreciated. And we're not going to be able to share responses during the session today, but we'll definitely utilize your feedback to create new resources or to provide helpful information in our newsletter. And we are very grateful to all of you who have been utilizing our help desk and bringing your questions there. We're always happy to answer those questions during the weekdays, during business hours. All right, so I'm going to end this poll question now. Got at least half of you being able to respond to that, which is good. And then I'm going to launch another poll question. So we have the opportunity to host an in-person FAFSA summit. So we wanted to know, with y'all being all across the state, where would be more convenient to host this, Birmingham or Montgomery? And as soon as we have details for that event, we'll definitely be sharing via our newsletter. All right, awesome. Thank y'all so much for your responses. And we're going to go on to our content. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, and it's used to determine a student's eligibility for grants, scholarships, work-study jobs, and low-interest loans. And so we really see the FAFSA being comprised of 7 main steps. The first 2 steps students can get done in advance of starting their application. And then the remaining steps are how they move through the application and then do some post-submission tasks. So we'll be going through all of these today, but we'll be going through steps 1 and 2 pretty quickly. So if you didn't attend our FAFSA 101 webinar back in October, that's available on YouTube, and that really goes in depth with the first 2 steps, which is why we're only going to cover them pretty quickly today. But feel free to check out all of our previous trainings on the FAFSA. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat so that you can access that pretty easily. So step 1 is the FSA ID. An FSA ID is just the username and password for students to access their federal student aid account, and it is required to start the form. So we always recommend that students go to studentaid.gov in advance of starting their application, and we typically recommend doing that 1 to 3 days in advance because it might take some time for the Social Security Administration to authenticate their FSA ID. A verified email address is required, so we encourage students to use an email address that they'll have forever, a personal email address, so not a work or school email address. And we get several questions about this through the help desk, but it does ask for a phone number. Students are not required to provide a phone number. It's nice to have a phone number in the event that the student needs to recover their account. That's one way to do the account recovery process. But really, the main thing required is the verified email address. So if a student gets an error saying that their phone number is already in use, don't panic. They really just need to provide the email address. So we have a worksheet in our educator toolkit that leads you through the process and gives some tips along the way. So I'm going to drop that into the chat as well so that y'all can access the toolkit. And the student will need the FSA ID, but then there also might be contributors who also need an FSA ID. And who contributes to a student's FAFSA will depend on a student's dependency status. So they're going to answer a series of questions to determine if they're an independent student or a dependent student. Independent students have to provide information about themselves and their spouse if they're married and they did not file taxes together. Dependent students have to provide information about themselves and their parent or parents. And which parent creates an FSA ID and then reports information on the FAFSA will depend on several factors. So we have 2 different tools that you can use. We have the Parent Wizard tool and the Is My Parent a Contributor flowchart that you can use to understand which parent needs to contribute to the FAFSA. And that way, parents aren't wasting their time creating an FSA ID if they don't actually need one. So this is a screenshot of the Parent Wizard tool, and you enter in some information and it tells you which parent needs to contribute. So we're going to have a scenario today looking at how to use this tool. This is the flow chart, so you just answer each question and go whichever direction you're answering, so yes or no, and then it tells you who needs to contribute to the student's FAFSA. So we're going to go through one scenario right now. So first scenario is Sam has been living with her Aunt Vivian ever since her parents, Jackie and Hank, got divorced. Vivian has not legally adopted Sam and is not her legal guardian as determined by a court. In terms of financial support, Vivian provides most of Sam's financial support, and then Jackie contributes the rest. So Sam's parents, Jackie and Hank, are divorced, and Sam's living with her Aunt Vivian. So I'm going to go to the Parent Wizard tool. Hopefully y'all can see that now. So we first enter the name of the student's legal parents. So Sam's parents are Jackie and Hank. It doesn't matter which order you put them in. We'll press continue. And then are Jackie and Hank married to each other, not separated? So we know that they got divorced. Do Jackie and Hank live together? They don't. And then which parent has provided more financial support for the student over the past 12 months? Well, we know that the student's aunt is actually providing most of the financial support, but then after the aunt, Jackie is providing more of the support. Did Jackie remarry? No. So the student's FAFSA parent is Jackie. So even though the student is living with Aunt Vivian, the student is going to get her mother, Jackie, to report her information on the FAFSA. So the student will need to invite only Jackie to the form, and then Jackie should report her marital status as single. And then the student's form will need Jackie's financial information. So if Jackie doesn't already have an FSA ID, she'll need to create one so she can contribute to Sam's FAFSA. And the next screen is just reiterating what we already said. So since Jackie provides more financial support than Hank, Jackie will create the FSA ID and contribute to the form. And when we're using the parent wizard tool, we start by putting Jackie and Hank as the legal parents because Vivian has not legally adopted Sam. So as you saw, the parent wizard tool tells you who the student needs to invite, and the student is almost always going to invite one parent. If a second parent ever needs to be invited in a different scenario, then the first parent can invite that second parent. We know that there was a lot of confusion last year and then possibly this year when a student is on the parent invitation page and they're presented with two columns to fill out. They usually assume that they need to just put both parents' information. What we strongly encourage is that every student uses the parent wizard tool to know who to invite and to only invite that one parent. For almost all students, they're only going to be inviting one parent. And then in any case where a student can invite either parent, so say they have married parents and they can invite either, the student should choose the parent who already has an FSA ID if that's applicable. Just going to check the chat real quick. So Lauren says, I have a student in that same scenario, but Jackie and Hank are nowhere to be found. So assuming in that same scenario, the student has not been legally adopted by whoever they're living with now, and Jackie and Hank are nowhere to be found. That student sounds like they're in a situation with unusual circumstances where they don't have contact with their biological parents. So in that case, when we cover the unusual circumstances in future slides, we'll emphasize what they're able to do in those circumstances. But for their case, they'll essentially be a provisionally independent student until the college can verify that they essentially have no contact with their biological parents. And then Charlotte asks, does the parent who claims the child on their taxes need to be invited? So we'll go over this in the future, but taxes have nothing to do with the FAFSA. So we never consider who is claiming a child on their income taxes. The FAFSA has very specific criteria for who the student invites as their parent on the FAFSA. So we don't even think about taxes when we're determining the dependency of the child. So we're going to do a second scenario. Katie's parents are married and file their taxes together. Katie's mom already has an FSA ID from when she was applying for aid during her master's program. So I'm going to go back to our parent wizard. Okay, we actually don't have names here, so we'll just do mom, dad. Are they married to each other? Yes. So both parents are parents on the FAFSA form. The student will need to invite only one parent to the FAFSA form, mom or dad. So because the mom already has an FSA ID, it's going to be way easier to just invite mom to the form. She already has a login, so that's the easiest option here. So yeah, in this case, Katie will just invite her mom. Her mom already has the FSA ID to log in, and she will have to provide information about Katie's dad, but he will not have to create an FSA ID. So let's talk about mixed status families. If you were in our last two FAFSA related webinars, you probably heard us talk about this topic. But after many conversations with college access and success practitioners, federal policy analysts, and then immigration attorneys, we have updated our guidance. So we've previously emphasized there are strong laws protecting student information and in particular FAFSA data, but we are in uncertain times in this current climate. So what we know is that historically, FAFSA data has not been used for purposes other than determining financial aid eligibility. And what we also know is that submitting information on the FAFSA is similar to submitting information through any government database, which many mixed status families have already done. So we know that if a mixed, and let me define mixed status family really quickly, just in case we're not on the same page. So a mixed status family is just a family where one member has a different status from the other members. And so what we're really referring to here is a US citizen student who either has one parent who is undocumented with no protected status or two parents who are undocumented with no protected status. So that would be a mixed status family. And so usually folks who are undocumented have some kind of hesitance around sharing their information. We know that in the past, information has only been used to determine aid eligibility and nothing else. And that oftentimes these folks are submitting their information to a local, state, or federal government database other than the FAFSA. And so submitting information to the FAFSA would really be a similar situation. So there are some families who might be more concerned than others to start a FAFSA, and who these would include would be students who are first-time FAFSA filers, students who are the first in their family to file a FAFSA, families whose information they know for sure is absent from all government databases, and then students whose parents are both undocumented. So they might have more hesitance around the situation. And essentially, what our updated guidance is telling families the facts. So, what we know, what we emphasized on this previous slide, and then allowing them to choose what they're most comfortable with. So, I'm going to turn it over to one of our coworkers, Ciamara, to talk about tips for communicating with families on this topic.
So when there are concerns about communication regarding this topic, some tips that I recommend would be reassuring eligible students that they can apply regardless of their parents' immigration status. They also allowing families and the students to lead in decision making conversations and respect their comfort level of sharing the information. Sometimes this topic can be very scary, and respecting the amount of information that they want to share is very important. So listening carefully to any concerns about security and addressing them thoughtfully. Um, Also staying informed about policies and new developments in this area. So just staying up to date with like reading our newsletters. We try to also stay up to date with any new policies or information that we find out. Or if you have like other community-based organizations that have a lot of this information, also staying up to date. Respect privacy and avoiding asking direct questions about immigration status. Again, this is a very sensitive topic for families, and opening up about this could be a little bit difficult. And also, if families decide and the students decide not to apply for the FAFSA, offer alternatives, such as like scholarships that they can apply for if they decide not to apply for the application. Next slide. So, if the families do decide to move on and apply for the application for the FAFSA application, um, parents without social security numbers need to create a FSA ID as well. Um, the only thing would be the only kind of difference that they would, on the application would be to check the box indicating that they do not have a social security number, and never to use the ITIN number on, where it says the social security number option. So on the next slide, we have an image of where they would indicate that they don't have a social security number, and again, never to put in the ITIN number as a social security number. Um, so instead of authenticating through the Social Security Administration, these parents verify their identity through alternative paths. And sometimes they're asked questions at the end, towards the end of the FSAID creation process. Um, and if they're not able to ask those questions because of issues with identity verification process for non-social security number holders last year, identity verification has once again been waived for the cycle. So we suggest that parents without social security numbers do not verify their identity this year. Again, just just to make sure that they're being safe. So, parents who are non-Social Security number holders are still able to immediately access the FAFSA, but they will have to manually input their financial information when it comes to putting in that information. Students typically invite their parents to contribute to the FAFSA, but in this situation, we encourage the parent to start the FAFSA and invite the student to avoid any matching uh, complications.
So we're going to go to step two, which is collecting documents. It obviously saves students a lot of time if they have all the necessary paperwork in advance. So you can utilize our checklist to prepare for the FAFSA. We have three different main sections. First, just confirming a student's dependency status, then getting everything the student needs to collect themselves, and then getting everything that a dependent student would need from their parents to provide on the FAFSA. So this is all in the educator toolkit. Okay, I'm going to pause for questions. I don't see any in the chat right now, but I just wanted to leave some time before we go to the main steps of the FAFSA after those kind of first two preparatory steps.
So when you know, mixed mixed status families do decide to fill out the FAFSA and you said don't have them verify that identity, what does that do if they don't verify it? Does it like
With this particular FAFSA cycle, they're not required to. So usually someone with a social security number, the Social Security Administration is verifying their identity. And because undocumented folks don't have that social security number, they had all these other methods of verifying that will be required in future years, but for right now, it's not required. So essentially, it's just going to be a person on the FAFSA, and whatever information they report needs to be an accurate depiction, but they're not going to be able to verify their identity with some kind of other government agency or means. So it's just going to be that the student reports their parents on the FAFSA, and there's really no follow-up as it relates to the parent's identity. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. And so now moving forward, we said don't fill it out. Now it's just at their discretion if they want to fill it out or not. That's up to them.
Yeah, our initial guidance was to wait. We were still wanting to hear from experts in the field and other practitioners. So we were most comfortable with advising to wait. Now we're really advising at the discretion of the family. And I got a few questions about this in the last week that it really kind of depends on the family situation. So has the family already shared information with the government? If so, the FAFSA is not really going to be a high risk for them because their information's already out there. Is the family completely off the grid? They might have different considerations. So it's really family dependent, and it's really a family centered decision that we want them to make.
Thank you.
No problem. And Josephine, I see your question. If one parent undocumented and their passport has expired, is this an issue in the future? Potentially, in the future, when they are required to verify their identity, there has been an expansion of the ways they can verify. So a passport was one option. So if their passport is expired, that won't be an option for them, but they could verify their identity with any of the other options that are available to them. And we hope that the expansion of those options will be more inclusive so that people are able to verify easily. All right, so we're going to continue on with the actual application. So students this year are completing the 2025-26 FAFSA because they're applying for aid fall 2025 through summer 2026. And then we mention the previous year's FAFSA because students who are going to start school immediately after graduation, so maybe June of 2025, they might need to complete the 2024-25 FAFSA. That really depends on the college they're attending. So any senior you have who's going to start school immediately in the summer, get them to check with their college on on if they need to also complete the 2024-25 FAFSA. And then sometimes we hear, oh, my student knows that they've definitely submitted their FAFSA, they know it's complete, but April rolls around and they haven't received aid offers. If that's the case, make them log into their account and see if they actually did complete the 2025-26 FAFSA, because often a student will think they have, but they actually did last year's FAFSA. And so that's why they're not receiving aid offers from all the institutions where they applied. So we're going to go kind of step by step through each screen of the FAFSA. So we start off, and in this situation, we're going to be looking at a student who's a dependent, and we're going to be going through it as if the student is starting the form and then inviting their parents. So they're going to click Start New Form or Edit Existing Form. And like we had mentioned, in some situations, we do advise the parent to start. For most situations, we advise the student. So the student will log in if they're not already logged in. We've been getting some feedback that when students use their username and password, they're getting an error, it's not letting them log in. We always recommend using their email address and password. For some reason, that seems to have less technical issues. After they log in, they select that they are the student. And then they're presented with several onboarding videos to tell them more about the FAFSA process. Then they see all of their information. This is going to be the information pulled directly from when they created their FSA ID. Here, they're not able to edit any of this information. So if they do need to make edits, they're going to have to go to account settings to do that. We do recommend if they had any updates to their address or anything else that they do make those edits as soon as possible. So they're going to put their state of legal residence, and then the date that they became a legal resident of that state. So if they were born in that state, then they're going to put the month and year of their birth. Here, the goal, we've heard this directly from federal student aid. Here, the goal is not to focus on the word legal, but really to think about where the student has been residing. So don't get hung up on the word legal. They're really just trying to determine where the student has been, and that's mostly for determining state aid eligibility. So the last two cycles of the FAFSA, we've had something called the direct data exchange, where it transfers an individual's federal tax info from the Internal Revenue Service straight to the Department of Education. And in order for all of that to happen, the student has to provide consent and approval for the system to just check that they have any tax records. The student's contributors also have to provide consent and approval. And then any transferred information is not going to actually be seen on the form. It's just going to be transferred into the back end. So when the student is navigating their screen, they'll see something asking them to provide consent and approval. And if there is any tax information, it's going to be pulling in prior year tax info. So that's going to be taxes from 2 years before the year that aid's received. So because we're doing the 2025-26 FAFSA, we're going to use the 2023 tax return, which was filed in 2024. And although the direct data exchange was supposed to make the process much more seamless, where students wouldn't need to have all of their records with them, we do still recommend families have access to their tax returns and then any supporting tax documents, just because it might be useful with certain additional questions that they encounter. So having access to an electronic PDF, say if they did it with H&R Block, they can log in, access their PF, or printing that out and bringing it when they're working on the FAFSA. That could be useful. So this is what it's going to look like to provide consent and approval. So they're going to get all this information. And then if there is anything to import, it will be imported. If there isn't anything to be imported, then it's going to say data not received. So the next section that students will encounter is the personal circumstances section, and that's going to determine the student's dependency status. So dependent students need to provide parent info. Independent students do not need to provide parent info. So these questions are all going to determine if the student is dependent or independent. So it's going to ask their marital status, and then it's going to ask when the student begins the school year, what will their college grade level be. For our graduating seniors, they're always going to put first year, even if they've done dual enrollment, even if they know they're going to go in with a lot of credits that make you a sophomore. It's essentially just trying to understand, have you been receiving aid in the past? And our graduating seniors haven't been. So they're going to put a first year. And then when the student begins the school year, will they already have their bachelor's? And they will not. Then they're going to be asked if any of the personal circumstances that you see here apply to them. If even one of these does apply, then the student is going to be an independent student who does not have to provide parent information. But if none of these apply, the student is likely a dependent student. Notice that each option has a little icon next to it. That's for you to be able to learn more information about what they're asking, just to make sure that you're understanding how they're defining something. For instance, when we're asked if the student is or was in a legal guardianship, we want to make sure that you're aware that legal guardianship and legal custody are different. And we want to know exactly what the student was in to make sure that we answer that question correctly. Then the students asked if they were homeless or at risk of being homeless. In this situation, we're going to say no. But if the student does say yes, then it's going to ask a follow-up question. And it's going to ask if any of the following entities or organizations determined that the student was homeless. So there are different organizations that can determine this. And then that record is available to the college where the student is applying to confirm their homelessness status. Now, we also have what are called unusual circumstances. So the FAFSA is going to ask all the questions that we just saw, and then say the student answers all those and it determines that they are a dependent student, but the student knows even though they should provide parent information, they're not going to be able to do that. So the only time a dependent student doesn't have to provide parent information is if the student has unusual circumstances, and we'll talk about what those are. But essentially, those unusual circumstances allow dependent students to receive what's called a provisional student aid index without providing the parent information. So they're going to have to follow up with the colleges where they've applied to give some kind of documentation to prove that they can't get parent info. So this is some of the options for unusual circumstances. So we have left home due to an abusive or threatening environment, abandoned by or estranged from their parents, have refugee or asylee status or separated from parents, or their parents are displaced in a foreign country, are a victim of human trafficking, the student themselves are incarcerated or their parents are incarcerated, and contact with the parents would pose a risk, and then otherwise unable to contact or locate the parents. We say this a lot, but the last bullet point, we really don't want folks to see that as a catch-all. We really want students to have one of the situations here that they can confirm or verify with their college. But for the most part, colleges do want to hear the student's situation and make sure that they're awarding aid appropriately. So if this does apply to any of your students, then they should check that they do have unusual circumstances. And then they'll always need to follow up with their college's financial aid office. So the application takes all the responses the student has given and determines the dependency status. So here we see that the student is determined to be dependent, so they have to provide parent info. If the student has parents who refuse to provide that info, so not that the student can't get in touch with the parents, but that the parents are in their home with them but still refuse to participate. In that case, then the student is going to indicate that their parents refuse, so they might say yes to this, which would make them eligible only for direct unsubsidized loans. So this is really not an option that we want students to be in, but we know it might happen. For the most part, we want to work as hard as possible to help parents understand the importance of contributing to the FAFSA so that their students are given many aid options and not just a direct unsubsidized loan. A dependent student will then answer questions about their parents. And just as a reminder, parents are legal parents are those who are biological or adoptive parents only. And so when we have many students who are in different living situations, so they might be living with a grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, or even an older sibling. The FAFSA is only asking about biological or adoptive parents. So based on the student's responses to these questions, the FAFSA is going to tell the student who to invite. Then when the student invites their parents to contribute to their FAFSA, they're going to need to submit the name, date of birth, social security number, and email address of their contributor. And all of that information has to exactly match what the parent has input on their account, except for the email address. So the email address can be really any email address that the parent is most likely to check or uses more frequently. It will just send that invitation directly to that email address. If the student enters any of the name, date of birth, or social security number incorrectly, they'll need to correct that in order for the invitation to be successful. So if the parent doesn't have a social security number, instead the student's going to provide a mailing address. And that mailing address has to exactly match what the parent what the parent input when they were creating their account. And because of that, this is why we really encourage people in this situation, so students who have parents with who do not have social security numbers, we encourage the parent to start the FAFSA and then invite the student. So here's what the invitation page looks like. So just as a reminder, we really encourage using the parent wizard tool to see which parent to invite. In almost every situation, the student should only invite one parent. So even though there are these two columns, almost every student's going to have the right column blank. And you'll see right here, it says optional. So for the most part, we're just going to be filling out the left side of the columns, and then we're going to send the invite to this parent. Again, the email address just has to be whichever email the parent will check. Students with two parents should not invite both parents just because they see the two columns. Again, revisit the parent wizard tool for guidance. And then for those students who have parents who don't have social security numbers, they'll need to check this box that you see the arrow pointing to and then enter the mailing address instead. Again, that's only if the student is inviting the parent. We really encourage the parent to invite the student. Then we get to student demographics. So all of the questions, or most of the questions in this section is just for research purposes. It's not going to impact aid eligibility, so the student has the option to respond, prefer not to answer. The student does have to indicate their citizenship status. So we have 3 different options. The first 2 are students who are eligible for federal aid, and then the last one is for students who are not eligible. So we'll define these in detail. So our first two options were US citizen and US national. So a US citizen is a person who's born in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and in most cases Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. And then it also includes persons born abroad to parents who are citizens themselves. And then a US national, natives of American Samoa or Swains Island. Then we had another option for students who are eligible non-citizens. And this includes all of the bulleted options you see here. So folks with a green card who are permanent residents, folks who have an arrival departure record, so this would be a refugee, an asylee, or a parolee, folks on a T visa or who have a parent with a T1 visa, so these are victims of human trafficking, battered immigrant status, so victims of abuse, and then citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or the Republic of Palau, and then folks who have status under the Jay Treaty, so these are Canadian-born Native Americans. So all of these are eligible non-citizens who are eligible to receive federal aid, even though they aren't US citizens or US nationals. Then we have folks who are not eligible for federal aid. This is going to include folks who've been granted Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, anyone who's on an F1 or F2 student visa, on a J1 or J2 exchange visitor visa, a G series visa, or have no protected status at all, so are undocumented students. These are folks who are not eligible for federal aid, so they really should not be completing a FAFSA. So the student indicates their citizenship status, and then they're asked their high school completion status. Then the student's going to enter in their high school, and so they can put their state and their city, and then after clicking search, they'll be able to select their specific high school. We really emphasize this part of the application because they have to select the correct high school in order for you as an educator to be able to track your school's FAFSA completion status. So this is the way that we get information to populate for your school through the Department of Education's data files. So it's really important that students put their correct high school here. Then the students move on to the financial section. So the students asked their tax filing status. We get a lot of questions about this. Some students file taxes, some don't. If you're curious what requirements students have to meet to need to file taxes, you can check the link here when we send out our PowerPoint slides later. But some students do have a filing requirement. It's going to depend on how much earned or unearned income they make. The student is then asked about their taxes, income, and other financial information, and all of these here require dollar amounts in the responses. And then the student is asked about their assets. So we have a guide that gives more detail on each of the kinds of assets. So that's in our educator toolkit and linked in this slide if you would like to visit it. If the student starts the form, which is what we typically advise, they're always gonna answer questions about the assets. Once their parent completes their portion, the FAFSA will use the student and parents' information to see if their household income is low enough to exempt them from reporting assets. So if a student answers here and then the FAFSA determines that their household income is low enough to not even use these answers, then those asset responses won't even be used. Next, we have the college selection process. So this is where the students are going to indicate all of the colleges and universities they want to receive their FAFSA information. They can list up to 20 schools. We highly recommend that students include every single college they're considering. It's easier to just go ahead and put all that information up front than going back and adding schools later. So really any school that they're considering, we recommend they add here. When searching for a school, they might not be able to see the full name of the school displayed on the screen, and this really matters if the school has multiple programs or locations. So if you're not able to see all of the details you need to select the correct campus, you might just Google the school's federal code instead, and that way you can use this option on the right, search by school code, to ensure that you are getting the correct campus that the student wants to apply to. So they can send their FAFSA to up to 20 schools, and so you see here that the student has made selections. Then we get to the review page. So this is going to display all of the responses that the students provided on their form. So you can either click this to expand all the sections, or just go section by section to see the responses for that individual section. And then to edit any of the responses, the students can just click the questions hyperlink and then be taken back to that particular page. Since this dependent student invited their parent to the form, they see that parent invitation right here. So they see the date the parent was added and the invitation was sent. And then if the parent completes their portion, then the status here would update. Then the student gets to the signature section, so they're going to review all of the terms and conditions of the FAFSA and understand what they're agreeing to when they sign the form. And then they're going to check this box to be able to agree and then sign. For dependent students, once they're done with their signing portion, they're going to have to make sure that the parents do their portion for their FAFSA to actually be considered complete. So here we see that the student has gotten all the way through their portion. So it says the student section is complete, not to be confused with the FAFSA is complete, because we know the FAFSA isn't complete until the parent here does their portion. There will also be some next steps further down on this screen. So it will tell students how they can track and manage their form. Then we're going to get to the contributor portion. I'm going to take a quick pause right here just to see if there are any questions about the student portion.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I have a student, and I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to check. I have a student, her parents are in Mexico. They don't help financially at all. She's pretty much dependent here in the States. So how would that work? Would she have an unusual circumstance, or would she still be dependent and then have to supply information of her parents?
From what you've told me, that student would still be dependent and would send the invitation to them. So one of the instances it references is separated from parents, or parents are displaced in a foreign country. But this doesn't sound like that situation fits that particular one. Now, if
Okay.
there's like absolutely no way to get in contact, that would be a different story, but it sounds like the student is able to get in contact.
Okay.
And what the student would do with parents in a foreign country is have them, there's an option when it's asking if the parents file taxes,
Mhm.
indicating that the parent files taxes in their home country.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I see one question in the chat. Dr. Hall, I'm not sure I'm following this question.
If they were going through, say, like their senior year, and they completed the FAFSA, the information in the thing, but they dropped out of school before the actual graduation and did not get their information to a college yet, are they still first time?
It sounds like if they've never filed a FAFSA before, that they would be a first-time filer. However, when they're going through the questions, high school completion status,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't sound like the student would have a response here.
Not in the year that they completed the FAFSA while they were in school, because usually that's done like the first or the second semester or something like that here. Then they dropped out, but they came back the next school year and re-entered into school to complete. So that's what I'm asking. I know it's two
Okay, with
different,
intentions to graduate?
right?
Okay. Um, just to make sure I'm understanding which question you're asking about. Are you just talking about when the student begins, what will their college grade level be?
No, no,
Because there
I'm
won't be a question asking if this is their first time filing. It will just ask what their college grade level will be when they start at after graduating high school, and then if they will already have their first bachelor's degree.
okay. So we're gonna assume that his status would be the second time he's sending it in, but he would still be a first time
Yeah,
because
would still be a
because
first
he
year
dropped.
student at their college or university.
Okay.
Yeah. And then did someone else have a question? I wasn't sure if someone was coming off of
Thank
mute.
you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, we'll get back to the parent section. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So when a dependent student invites their parent to contribute, their parent will log in using their own FSA ID to complete their section. For students whose parents are non-Social Security holders, we recommend the parent start the form and invite the student. So the parent will get an invitation, they'll get an email telling them that they've been invited to contribute, and they can click Get Started and be taken directly to studentaid.gov. If they're not already logged into their account, they can log in using their credentials. So again, they have their own username and password. Then when they're logged in, they're going to be taken to their My Activity page, which shows that their student wants their help on the FAFSA. So they're going to see that invitation and they're going to accept the invitation. Now, the parent has almost the same questions that the student has, but they have a few additional ones. One is about the size of the family and if it differs from the number indicated on their tax return. They're also going to be asked the number of people in the household who are in college, and then they'll be asked annual child support received. So these are questions that the student doesn't see on their end, but the parent sees on their end. Right, when the parent gets through demographics, financials, and signature, they're also going to acknowledge that they agree to the terms and conditions. And then because all of the sections are now complete, so the student section and the parent section, rather than just seeing sign down here, they see sign and submit. So they are submitting the full FAFSA for the student because both sections are now complete. So instead of saying your section is complete, it says the FAFSA form is complete because both student and parent sections are finished. So when the parent is the one submitting, they're going to be shown an abbreviated confirmation page. And the student will then receive an email with full detailed confirmation. And then with both sections complete, the FAFSA form is now considered complete, and so it is submitted for processing. So once the parent has done this part, the student should be able to check when they log in and see a status update for their FAFSA. So once the FAFSA is processed, the student should receive the FAFSA submission summary. They should receive email notification that this is available. And so they're able to pull that up and then also make any corrections that are required. At the top, the student is going to see information about when their form was received and then when it was processed. And then they also have the option to print their FAFSA submission summary to keep for their records or maybe to send to a scholarship organization that is requiring a submission summary. They can also make corrections directly from this page. So on the eligibility overview tab, the student will see information about what federal student aid they may be eligible for. So this will include federal Pell Grant aid or federal direct loans. Then they're also able to view their student aid index or their SAI. That is going to be used by the colleges where they've applied to make determinations of how much aid they'll be offered. Any amount of financial aid that's displayed on the eligibility overview tab is just an estimate and not guaranteed. So I think we have an example here. So like here you see the estimated aid summary. These aren't going to necessarily be exactly what the student is offered, but it gives the student an idea. Our next step is the verification process. Verification is used by colleges and universities just to confirm what the student has provided on their FAFSA. It doesn't necessarily mean the student has done anything wrong. It's just another way of verifying any information that might require more documentation. Ideally, with the direct data exchange being utilized, verification should hopefully be less common. I think the goal coming directly from the US Department of Education was that they would be reducing the instances of verification for students. Now, some colleges and universities require their own verification process, and they might be continuing a certain percentage of students who do get verified. Where it says may be eligible for work study, that depends on the university or college, right? Yes, the university or college will be the one offering that option to students. Then we get to our aid offers. So once the FAFSA has been processed, colleges use that information to determine eligibility and then send students letters of their aid offers. If the information on the FAFSA does not reflect the student's actual financial situation, the student is able to share special circumstances with the financial aid office of their college. So special circumstances include changes to or loss of employment, any medical bills, or other expenses. And then that financial aid office can use what's called professional judgment to alter the student's aid offer. So because the FAFSA is using 2023 taxes to kind of get a picture of the family's uh, financial circumstances, if anything has happened after 2023 that has significantly altered the family's financial situation, we really encourage students to share that with their aid office. So those are all of our steps. We have a few key messages that we want to reiterate. The FAFSA is free to complete. It's for more than just academic degrees. It's for technical and professional certificates. We really emphasize in Alabama Pell Grant aid. So students may be eligible for up to the maximum award, which is $7,395 per year. And on average, tuition and fees at a community college in Alabama is around $5,000. So if students receiving full Pell Aid, that would fully cover the cost of tuition and fees at any of our community colleges. And we know that more than half of Alabama's students are eligible for Pell Aid. Many non-federal grants and scholarships also require FAFSA completion, so it's not just a way to access federal aid, it's really for so many different kinds of aid. And then we really encourage students to make some kind of calendar or to-do list that highlights any scholarships or FAFSA priority deadlines for the colleges where they're applying. Each college might have a different date that they consider their priority deadline, so it's good to look up that information wherever a student's applying. Then we have key messages for parents. So it's safe and secure using studentaid.gov. This information is only being used to determine your student's eligibility for aid. Your student really needs your help getting key information for you to complete the application. So parents who are hesitant are often a barrier for our students. So if we can just keep consistent messaging about the way that this opens up doors for our students, that's really critical. And then we also get a little bit of pushback with families thinking they're not going to qualify for aid. We always say it's good to have on file in case of the unexpected. Financial circumstances change all the time. But not only that, it really is for just more than federal loans or things that are need based. It's required for so many other opportunities coming from scholarship organizations and the like. So the FAFSA is for everyone, regardless of income situation. All right, I'm going to highlight a few resources. So we have our educator toolkit where you can access the resources that you saw on our screen today, but that will also be available in our follow-up email. I'm going to put that in the chat one more time. Then the National College Attainment Network, who we are members of their network, they have a training toolkit that we've linked. And then federal student aid has 2 pages. The top one we'll be referencing throughout this entire FAFSA cycle, but it's issue alerts that describe current issues with the FAFSA form. Federal student aid is constantly working to resolve those. But if you're working with your senior class and you're seeing a common theme, students are all experiencing the same issue, it's likely that there's already been an alert about it, and they've either given a workaround for you to be able to bypass the issue, or they've made a note that they anticipate the issue being resolved on such and such date. So feel free to contact us to kind of work through those issues, but if you'd also like to reference this page, it gives a lot of detail about the issues. And I will definitely be looking through your response to the poll question earlier today to see if there's a common theme around the issues y'all are experiencing. So these are the updated hours of operation for the Federal Student Aid Hotline. So we always recommend you contact our help desk first. We'll give you the number to that later. And then kind of use the Federal Student Aid Hotline as a last resort. We know wait times can be long, but we were told that Tuesdays and Wednesdays seem to be best. So they've extended the hours specifically for FAFSA related questions. So 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Central, Monday through Friday, and then 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central on Saturday, and then close Sunday and federal holidays. There have also been interpretation or translation support resources uploaded to federal student aid. So as students and contributors are working on their FSA IDs or their FAFSA, they can access content in many other languages that you see here. So you'll have this link in the follow-up email. And then they can also request support by calling this number that you see on the screen and then pressing 7 to reach an agent and then saying interpreter and the name of the language that they would like to speak in. So if you have folks who need a specific language, whether it's the student or their parents, they're able to utilize this. We're also happy to connect you to interpretation resources if you're wanting that for any of the events you're hosting. So feel free to email us if you have any of those needs. I wanted to plug really quickly our toolkit takeaways. So if you haven't seen any of our others earlier this year, these are just bite-sized videos that are meant to quickly take you through our educator toolkit and show you the resources that we are highly recommending you use. So they're around 5 minutes long, and we have one available to show you different ways to promote the FAFSA with families. And then we have another one showing you all the resources you can use to educate yourselves and your families on the different steps of the FAFSA. So we have both of those uploaded to our YouTube channel right now. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to the playlist in the chat. And then we're going to go ahead and take questions. I saw one in the chat, so I'm going to start with that right now. I have a mom who works and makes less than her ex-husband. With any situation, before I continue reading, you're gonna use either the parent wizard tool or the flowchart tool to determine which parent should be reported. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull that up right now. All right, here's our flowchart. Her son lives with her full time, but her ex-husband pays child support and alimony. But she doesn't have to file that on her tax because her divorce was after 2019, and she doesn't have to claim that money as income. Okay, so with any student whose parents are divorced, we'll go through these questions. Are your biological parents married to each other? No. Do your biological parents live together? From what it sounds like, no. Did one parent provide more financial support than the other over the past 12 months? So that's the question that we need to answer for this student. So all of the factors that you included here, like child support, alimony, mortgage, car payment, they're going to decide which of these two parents provides more financial support. If there's a clear response to that, that person is going to be reported as the parent on the FAFSA. If they're looking at the support they provide and they think, oh, we provide the exact same amount of support, in that case, then the student is going to include the parent who had the greater income or asset. But what it boils down to for the mom and dad who are divorced here is who provided more financial support. So do you think that they'll be able to answer that question, Lana?
Yeah, she was just concerned because, like she said, she doesn't have to report it on her taxes. So she was wondering, she didn't want to do anything wrong. And so you've answered my question.
Okay. And yeah, before we consider like income and assets, we're first just thinking like how much money does she spend on the student? How much money does the other parent spend on the student? And if
Okay.
one spends more than the other, then that person has provided more financial support over the past 12 months. But yeah,
Okay.
that sounds complicated, especially with all the details they're giving you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mm. All right, I don't see any more questions. So for us to get out on time, I want to give y'all the poll questions for your professional development eligibility. So I'm going to launch on your screen our first set of questions related to satisfaction. And there will be one more set of questions after this, but I'm going to give it another minute for folks to respond. Okay, your second set of questions should be launched now. We had one question we received during registration. So I know when we were going through both the student financial section and the parent financial section, we didn't talk in depth about the specific questions that get asked about income. So I had a question during registration about adding income to the FAFSA for parents who are not employed but are receiving supplemental security income, social security benefits, or retirement. And with questions like this, we really have to understand a lot more detail to be able to respond. But generally, folks who are only receiving social security benefits are exempt from filing taxes. But because this person said Social Security benefits and retirement, it sounds like they're getting other forms of retirement, so they might still have a tax filing requirement. In that case, their situation really isn't different from anyone else, so they would be indicating that they filed a tax form. They would be using the direct data exchange to pull that tax information in, and then they would be responding to the questions about their income. So it just depends on the situation. Some people don't have to file taxes and some people do. So if you have any, I don't know if the participant is here right now, but if you have any follow-up questions to that, we'd be more than happy to answer. So I want to make sure that you have the code for PowerSchool to be able to register for PD credit. So the course number is 322173. And the section number is 510300. We ask that y'all do that within 48 hours so that we're able to have everything finalized on the PowerSchool side for you. All right, so a few things on the horizon for us. We have our College Admissions 101 webinar. It's the second part, so it's focused on out-of-state institutions. That'll be on January 22nd at 10:30 a.m. And then in February, on the 5th, we're going to have our Charting Career Pathways webinar. We're also considering adding a couple more FAFSA webinars just as we get updates. So we'll inform you of any additions through our newsletter. Here is our help desk number. So you can text or call us at 334-316-6155. We are happy to assist your families, so feel free to share that number with them as well. And then as always, you can also email us your questions. So we're at algoes2college@alabamapossible.org. And that, of course, is where you're receiving our weekly newsletter. Is there anyone here who has not been receiving our newsletter? We had one go out this morning and it provided more detail on the situation for mixed status families. So hopefully you had a chance to see that. All right, well, thank y'all so much for your attendance. I hope your school year is, or your calendar year is starting well and that the second half of the school year goes well for you and your students. We're always here to support. So please feel free to reach out and I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.